And hello everyone, thanks for joining me for another deck tech today. This is Aaron, and I'm going to show off one of my favorite decks in the spirit of it being the spooky season. We're going to show off Vampires, and it's going to be a modern version. Edgar Markov as a commander has been around for a little while, but I'm going to talk about my version of it. There was a lot of sets that had a lot of influence on this, specifically just Midnight Hunt, and there was Crimson Vow, and then the Commander deck. So there's a lot of those cards in here. I've had this deck for a long time, but those decks had a really big impact on it. And this is more of a, like, it's Edgar Markov, and I know that comes with a lot of baggage. People don't like the Eminence mechanic, but it's a flavorful deck for me, and it's not like a super optimized, it's not a combo deck. And we'll get into the deck tech in a little bit first here, but I just want to do a little showing off, I guess I want to call it. I'm going to start with this 3D printed case that I made and designed myself. Has some pretty cool, this is just a top loader, by the way, so I could put my commander in the storage. I don't have an Etsy, I'm not selling these. I might put these up on Thingiverse. If anyone's interested in it, please let me know. Because I still have all the design files. But we have a little vampire logo in here. This is from Blood Bowl, specifically. And my favorite is on the top. We have the insignia from What We Do in the Shadows, which is a vampire-themed show that I love and enjoy. And there's a bit of a theme to this, obviously, vampires. You know, there's a lot of things you can pull inspiration from for vampires. But specifically, I lean towards Castlevania, because I am uncultured trash, and Castlevania is my number one way of knowing, or my main exposure to Bram Stoker's Dracula. So a little more, just a little flair here, because this is just one of my favorite decks. I've had it for a long time. So this isn't a real, just want to get this out of the way, this is not a real Judge promo here. It's fake. I ordered it from Wish. I have branded it fake, so if it ever leaves my hands and enters the economy, then hopefully whoever's grading this card can see that it has been branded. And the reason I have this specifically is just because there was a point when Crimson Vow came out, Edgar Markov was probably getting really close to being like a $200 card. And in the game of Commander, you hand your commanders out, your commanders get stolen, things like that, or people just want to read your commander. It's an important card. And it's just something I wasn't super comfortable giving to people. So like I have my real Edgar Markov in kind of a hard case. He's gone down in price. He's about like maybe 70, 80 bucks, which is still a lot of money for a piece of cardboard. Like even the big jumbo version, which I still have from my pre-con I bought years and years back, is worth that much somewhere, like $20-$30 for a jumbo size card. But here's Edgar Markov. He has Eminence. Eminence means that he doesn't care if he's on the battlefield or in the command zone. His ability will activate whether despite which location he is, and people kind of don't like that because you get the benefits of Eminence for doing nothing but just playing vampires. One thing that I like to do if people aren't cool with Eminence is I like to we make Eminence an emblem, and it's just like, hey, I have to cast my commander once just to get this Eminence emblem, and then I have that ability. And Edgar Markov's a 6-mana card. But this deck does want to cast Edgar Markov. A lot of people say, oh, you just get the value and you can do all the busted stuff with the vampires outside of that and just getting 1/1s for free. And that's typically how most people build their really high-powered Edgar Markov decks. This is not one of them. Eminence says, whenever you cast another vampire spell, if Edgar Markov is in the command zone or on the battlefield, you create a 1/1 black vampire creature token, and he has first strike and he has haste. And when he attacks, you put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. So like I said, there's a lot of busted stuff you could do with free 1/1s. I have some of it in here, not all of it. And we'll get into it, but I try to keep this deck a little as low powered as Edgar Markov can maybe be, and I try to make it a flavor deck. But like I said, I've only had to do that Rule 0 once. Most people know what they're getting into when they play against it. But I talked a little bit about the flair, just because, I like this is a cool deck for me. So I have the fake Judge promo, branded, show that off. And I have these cute little tokens that I got off of Etsy. I believe the brand's on the back. It's Mega Chibi. Yep, there it is. So these are all from Mega Chibi. These are the tokens that Edgar makes. These are the tokens that, oh my goodness, I can't remember her name. Alenda makes. And I forget who makes these tutus, but we'll get there. And then we got some zombies, because there's some cards. I make a couple zombies in here. But just make sure you have your tokens. That's a pet peeve of mine. I will get annoyed if someone's playing a token-heavy deck and they don't have it. And I usually talk about how lands bring me no joy, but I'll get into that first. But some of these lands do bring me joy. Specifically, these Secret Lair Dracula lands. I am a big fan of those. They look really cool. Art's pretty dope. Especially love this swamp. And this Blood Crypt, which depicts Edgar Markov doing the pose on Innistrad, and this is from a Secret Lair, and I particularly love that. We have Urza Saga. It's in here to get a couple of cards. Specifically, there used to be a Mana Crypt in this deck a long time ago, but I think Mana Crypt on top of Eminence kind of tilted a lot of people, so I stopped running Mana Crypt in almost all of my decks in general. But this can grab Skull Clamp, which is usually what I go for. So your target's a Skull Clamp and Soul Ring, because this is Commander. And we have Castle Dracula. You can add a colorless and pay 1 life, add mana of any color, spend it to cast a vampire spell, and you can pay 5 and create a blood token. And it costs 1 less for each vampire you control, and this deck controls a lot of vampires, so for the most part it's usually just tap and create a blood token. And we have Phyrexian Tower flavored to be Dracula's Tomb, which is a card that I love and adore. We have Urborg in there, and somewhere in here, I didn't put it in my fun lands list, but we have Cabal Coffers to do the dreaded combo with. So this deck kind of curves a little low. There's like a 7-drop in here, but I believe that is the most expensive card in here. And we'll just kind of go over the ramp package a little bit. I consider Smothering Tithe to be a ramp card. But, you know, everyone, if you've played Commander, you know what this card does. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they can pay 2, and if they don't, you get a treasure, and no one pays the Smothering Tithe. We have Felwar Stone, just to fix our mana. Soul Ring, this is Commander. Arcane Signet, nothing particularly interesting or standoutish here. Rakdos Signet, Thought Vessel, but that's the ramp package, that's about it. So next we have our removal, because you gotta remove things, especially the whole point of this deck is to go wide. So you want to be able to go wide, and you want to make sure that there's things that aren't blocking you, because this deck almost turns sideways every single turn. So we have Path to Exile, Source of Plowshares, Anguish Unmaking, which is a dope card if you're in anything that can run this, but obviously it's got a picture of Sorin Markov on it, so got to do it for the vampire flavor. So that's one where I opted to not run the Secret Lair version. I'm like, you know what, nah, it's got to have Sorin on it. Chaos Warp, Generous Gift, dealing with those specific permanents. This is like just a funny card to me, just because it's just called Damn. That's pretty funny to me, but you can overload it. It's a Wrath of God, and if not, it's single target removal. Really flexible card. I like this card because it can take up your board wipe slot. We have Toxic Deluge because we're playing black, and you need the most efficient spell in those colors. And New Blood, one of my favorite removal cards. People have told me to take this card out this deck, and I absolutely refuse to do it. As an additional cost to cast New Blood, tap an untapped vampire you control, gain control of target creature, change the text of that creature by replacing all instances of one creature type with vampire. So I love this card. Most of the time it's just 4 mana, just gain control of whatever problematic creature. My favorite sandbag in Commander is to have something like this. It's just like, oh yeah, like I can deal with the Emrakul, or I can deal with the big card right there, and I'm like, yeah, I'll take it off their board, and I'm like, all right, New Blood, like under new management. But the changing the text is very relevant. I had a situation where I took someone's Krenko, and so Krenko became a a vampire that when you tap him, he makes 1/1 red vampires, and it's like, okay, cool. Krenko's putting out vampires because every instance of goblin has been changed with vampires. So there's a lot of fun interactions that could be had with this card, and I love it. We have Olivia's Wrath. Each non-vampire creature gets -X until -XX until end of turn, where X is the number of vampires you control. So it could be a board wipe, but you need to have a lot of vampires for it, and most of the time it is just a way to clear the path. And if this deck, I mean, obviously your commander is out there just pooping out vampires for every vampire you cast, you're going to have a lot of vampires, and all you really need is like 5 or 6 for this deck to start doing damage with this card and clearing the way. So we have Markov Enforcer. So this is a 6-mana card. This card is probably objectively bad by commander standards, but I love it. I love the big vampire beaten up lady. Because when Markov Enforcer or another vampire enters the battlefield under your control, it fights up to 1 target creature an opponent controls, and when a creature dealt damage by Markov Enforcer this turn dies, create a blood token. So, fun interactions with this card is when you cast her, Edgar triggers, and that vampire comes in first. She comes in, and then she fights a vampire, and then if you cast another vampire, if you get to untap with her, then she gets to fight people twice a turn, and that's removing 2 things each time. So we do have some card draw in here, a lot of tutors in here, and that's something that I disclose. We have Enlightened Tutors, so search your library for an artifact or enchantment and reveal that card, shuffle your library. This is in here, it's a flexible card. I know there's probably combos in here that I'm not aware of, but most of the time I'm grabbing something like Skull Clamp or Anointed Procession or something like that, just to make the vampire strategy as strong as possible. We have Demonic Tutor. Search your card for a library, put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library, so just go get a card. And this deck kind of runs a little low land count, so I actually find myself using a lot of my tutors to get lands sometimes, because I'm an idiot, and I run like maybe 34 lands in this deck. We have Vampiric Tutor. I actually don't really like Vampiric Tutor, but vampires, I gotta put Vampiric Tutor in the vampire deck. So, and it's also an insanely powerful card as a downside, but I personally would prefer, if I had a choice between demonic and vampire, I will almost always go demonic, even though Vampiric Tutor is instant and you lose life and all sorts of downsides and stuff like that. But I know it's strong. I know why it's strong, but I don't like losing life. So we have Necropotent. Speaking of not liking losing life, skip your draw step. When you discard a card, exile that card from your graveyard, and then pay 1 life, exile the top card of your library face down, put that card into your hand at the beginning of your next end step, so you will always have 7 cards. If you need a specific card and you need to just burn 20 life and draw 20 cards and put them in exile, and then get those cards back if you're digging for something deep, or you can just go down to 1 life if you need a specific answer. Insanely powerful card. Not particularly hard to cast. We have Phyrexian Arena. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card, lose a life. So I'm a big believer in Phyrexian Arena in any deck that runs black. I know there's a lot of people that are against Phyrexian Arena, and they're just oh, just run Necropotent. So I'm like, why not both? You need multiple sources of card draw. We have Skull Clamp. Equipped creature gets +1/-0. When that equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. The Edgar Markov himself makes 1/1s for every vampire that you cast. So you can cast it, spend 1 mana, draw 2 cards. You can absolutely fill your entire hand very easily. So you have Welcoming Vampire, a new one from Crimson Vow. Whenever 1 or more creatures with power 2 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability only triggers once a turn. So you almost always get to draw a card for casting a vampire, which is what it really turns into, because the 1/1 token will come in. You can Anthem yourself out of this card. I've done it before where I have more than 1 Anthems and they're coming in at 3/3s, but at that point I'm getting 3/3s for casting vampires. I'm not particularly mad that I'm not getting the, I'm already getting value from just playing Edgar Markov. So you have Champion the Dusk. When it enters the battlefield, you draw X cards and you lose X life, where X is the number of vampires you control. So if you have 17 vampires, you draw 17 cards, you lose 17 life. This is a card that can probably be replaced with something like a Night's Whisper or something like that. I do have a Night's Whisper in this deck. But it's a vampire. It's synergistic. And one cool thing is that you're always going to get +1 because the Edgar trigger resolves first. So by the time Champion of Dusk enters the battlefield, he sees the vampire that was created off of his cast, so you get 1 extra card just for playing Edgar Markov. Twilight Prophet, which is a weird card, but it's flying, it has Ascend, so if you have more than 10 permanents, you get the City's Blessing, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have the City's Blessing, you can reveal the top card of your library, put it into your hand, and each opponent loses X life and gains X, and I gain X life, where X is that card's converted mana cost. So there is a life gain sub-theme in this, because obviously it's vampires, we're going to drain you for all your life. This is an insanely slow card that requires having a big board, and it takes a lot of work. And almost always when I play it does absolutely nothing, because I'll play it and then it'll get board wiped or anything like that. It'll stick around for a turn or two and I reveal the top card and it's a swamp and I don't get to do it, but I'm still drawing cards or anything like that. So I'm not particularly mad at it. So it's not like, I know this card's like $30-$40 or something like that right now, which is a lot of money. I'm sure that's probably because of some other format. Definitely not Commander. Very slow card in this format. But it's card advantage. It's a Phyrexian Arena tied to a vampire, and I'm going to put that into the vampire deck. We have a newer one from Midnight Hunt. We have Falcon Wrath Pit Fighters. So discard a card, sacrifice a vampire, draw 2 cards, and activate only if an opponent lost life this turn. It's really, really selective of what it wants, because you have to discard a card, you have to sacrifice a vampire, then you get to draw cards, then your opponent has to have lost life this turn. It's very, very, very strict about the card advantage on it. But in a deck like Edgar Markov, you're always going to have a vampire to sacrifice. That's almost an easy gimme on that. And then discarding a card. I don't have a lot of the madness effects in this deck. Actually, I don't think I have anything madness in this deck, so discarding is going to hurt, but you go up 2 cards, but you almost always have it. And fun thing about this card, as you can see, it costs 1 red, so you can just pop this down on turn 1. And there's a couple of like really low mana cost vampires in here just to get things started really early and just putting that pressure on early in the game. And we have Night's Whispers, which is flavored to be Night Feeder's Visitation. You draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. I'm not particularly a fan of Night's Whisper. I'd rather have something like a Phyrexian Arena, but I had to run the Dracula variant of this card. Like that seemed like I basically took that entire Secret Lair and just turned it upside down in this deck. We have Forerunner of the Legion. Probably should have been with the Tutors. When Forerunner of the Legion enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a vampire card, reveal it, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. And whenever another vampire enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So you're going to have a lot of vampires entering the battlefield with this effect, and you'll also be able to go and get whatever vampire you need. This isn't particularly like I always get X in this sort of situation. I always have to think about what vampire I need in what specific situation, depending on where I'm at mana-wise, because I get mana screwed in this deck a lot, because like I said, I run low ramp and I run low lands. But I want room for more vampires, and that is something I willingly do to myself. Yeah, but just go get a vampire, you get to draw it next turn. And then we have the Scion of Opulence, which is from the Precon that came out with Vow. And whenever Scion of Opulence or another vampire I control dies, you create a treasure token and you can sacrifice 2 artifacts, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So you're sacrificing treasures, and you're sacrificing and you're getting card advantage, and you're getting the impulse draw, which is pretty cool. So like I mentioned, there's a lot of life gain in this deck. not a dedicated life gain deck, but I like to having a lot of the pieces there because it's for flavor purposes. So we have Vampire Nighthawk, which is just a beater, flying, death touch, lifelink. Like it's a decent body. It makes people hesitate because it can block everything. And most of the time it's there just to turn sideways, and it gets anthemed up, and I get to gain some life. We have Malakir Blood Witch, which is a card I love. It reminds me a lot of Grey Merchant and Asphodel, but if that was for vampires. It has flying, protection from white, which is very relevant sometimes. And when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses life equal to the number of vampires you control. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. So this deck likes to go wide, and you're always going to have room to do some damage with Malakir Blood Witch. And speaking of life gain, what is life gain? Without veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. And yes, I have the combo in here. I just earlier said I'm not sure if I have combos, and I just remembered it right now. I do have the Exquisite Blood combo because I put it in there with the Secret Lair. But whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. Creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. And Blood Tribute, another stupid card that I enjoy running in. You can only really get away with it in a deck like this, unless your commander is specifically a vampire or you're playing some sort of vampire tribal. But it has Kicker, tap and untap vampire you control. And guess what you do in this deck? You control a lot of vampires. That is a very easy Kicker requirement. Target opponent loses half of their life rounded up. If Blood Tribute was kicked, you gain life equal to the amount of life lost this way. These two combo kills one person. If I have veto on the board and I cast Blood Tribute, I can absolutely kill exactly one person. And it's probably whoever's going to be the biggest threat, or whoever I perceive to be the biggest threat. And we have Hunger of the Ancient One, Exquisite Blood, which whenever an opponent loses that much life, you gain that life. Gain that much life, and that is an infinite loop with these two. So this wins the game instantly. These two kill a person instantly. So we got our combos in here. And Aether Flux Reservoir. I said there's a lot of life gain in here, and when you have, like, I've been sitting at like three figures of life a couple of times in here. And a card like Aether Flux, if you just top deck it, then you just absolutely kill someone. Also, like I said, this deck curves low, so the amount of times I'm casting 2 or 3 spells a turn, very common. So even without having the big health, Aether Flux Reservoir allows me to always have a little life. And the thing about this deck is that I get beat up a lot. I get targeted a lot. I'm arch enemy just from sitting at the table, which is fine because Eminence sucks, and I admit that. And I am fully deserving of being arch enemy for just sitting at the table and pulling this commander out. But this is one of those cards that helps you to fight back, and then you can also, if you're at 50, at plus 50 life, then you can immediately just hold the board ransom. And that's a. I know people hate this card because they're just like, I don't like being at the Mexican standoff with the Aether Flux player, but I mean, I'm gonna do it. There's a reason why a lot of I have an elevator pitch for this deck that, if I remember, I'll give it at the end of the speech. But like, I have a little elevator pitch prepared for people for this deck. But I like to let people know what they're getting into when I pull this out of the table. We have Anointed Procession. If you would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of the tokens instead. So I'm getting 2 vampires for each Edgar Markov trigger. And then there's a lot of other cards in here that give tokens as well. A Lend of the Dusk Rose, even, there's a bunch of other stuff that you could just start doubling off of. And now we're just going to kind of get into the meat of this deck, which is just the vampire beaters. I promise vampires. I haven't shown too many vampires, but we have a Merstrom Predator, which is flying. When it becomes tapped, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard and put a 1/1 counter on a Merstrom Predator, sacrifice another creature, and it gains an indestructible until end of turn, and then tap it. So I like this card, 1, because it's a pet card from Standard right now. 2, it's a sacrifice outlet, and it's graveyard hate. It's like very specific graveyard hate. But being able to, and also it's a dragon and also a vampire. That is, how can I not put this in here? So, like I said, we have a life gain sub-theme, so Blood Artist is a vampire. I need to get the new art, the one from Double Masters 2. I really need to get that one, because I love that art so much better than the old school Blood Artist, so that's something that's going to get replaced at one point. Cordial Vampire. Whenever Cordial Vampire or another creature dies, put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. So this is a way of tracking your anthems, it's not even anthems, you're just putting counters on all your dudes on your insanely wide board. Gives cards a menace. Cruel Celebrant. Whenever Cruel Celebrant or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So I don't have any planeswalkers, and I want to throw this out there. I don't have the Castlevania art of Soren the Mirthless. I wish I did. It was probably like close to $90 when I was upgrading this deck the last time I upgraded it, and that art is cool but not worth it. And also it's kind of just, I don't like planeswalkers in Commander either. I don't get a vampire for casting it. I have Soren the Mirthless, I have the regular art, and I also have the Dracula variant of him, but I did not get the Castlevania artist one, and that makes me sad. But this triggers, reason I'm here on this tangent, it also triggers when planeswalkers die as well. We have Legion Lieutenant. Other vampires you control get +1/+1, and turns out we have a lot of those. We have Callous Blood Mage. When it enters the battlefield, I can create a pest token. I can draw a card and I lose 1 life, and I can exile target player's graveyard. So I originally put this card in the deck as just card draw, because I'm just thinking, oh, I'm going to have to just card draw most of the time. But a lot of times I find myself having to exile target player's graveyard. And all 3, I mean, I don't know about the pest token, but all of those 2 modes are very relevant. I could just play this, draw a card, dig deeper into my deck, and then I also get a vampire. So every vampire in this deck is a 2-for-1. Or exile the graveyard, and I'm okay with that. Captivating Vampire probably should have been with the removal cards, because this card is straight up removal. Other vampire creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can tap 5 untapped vampires you control. Gain control of target creature. It becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. And if I play this late in the game, I could just start stealing stuff, especially when people declare attacks towards me. And that's what I like to do, which is like, I'll either do this on my end step, or someone's like, oh, I'm going to swing this at you. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to tap 5 vampires. I'm going to take them. And he's the one who taps it. It's an activated ability. And it doesn't require the tapping. So I can do this with Summoning Sickness, and getting 5 vampires is insanely easy. And there's most of the times I have like 15 vampires, and I'm taking 3 things every turn, and it gets bad. Drana, Liberator of Malakir. It's flying, first strike. Whenever it deals combat damage, put a 1/1 counter on each attacking creature you control. So this is kind of a backup commander a little bit, but not really. But it does the same thing that Edgar Markov does for his ability of just rewarding you for attacking, and so it's just kind of a way to double up on that ability, sort of. Florian Voldaren Scion. So this should have also been with card advantage. And he has first strike, and at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the total number of life your opponent's lost this turn. Exile one of those cards and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. You may play the exile card this turn. So this is if you do enough damage, and you do something like even like 10 damage, it's like dig 10 cards into your library and just get the best card within those 10. And it's very easy to dig deep and just grab specifically what you need. So this card gets out of control. We have Mavrin Fine, Dusk Apostle. Whenever one or more non-token vampires you control attack, create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. So I like this because it rewards the non-token vampires to attack, and there's a lot of them in this deck. So it's not just rewarding you for just having a lot of tokens, and it's forcing you to attack with your non-token vampires. And I like that. So we have Stormkirk Captain, first strike. Other vampire you control get +1/+1 and have first strike, and that first strike is so relevant. because people were usually happy to block, and then blocking gets complicated just by turning a whole board of vampires sideways. We have Yeheni, Undying Partisan, Haste. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a 1/1 counter on Yeheni, Undying Partisan. Sacrifice another creature and it gains indestructible. So Yeheni's a card that I was just like, oh, it's cool. It's a vampire. It can protect itself. Has haste. It gets big. But one thing that I always underestimate is just having a sack outlet, being able to give it indestructible and survive. It can survive board wipes. It could get real big. Someone's like, oh, well, I have 10 vampires on the board and they're going to cast a board wipe. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to sack them all to Yeheni, and Yeheni's going to survive the board wipe. Or even, if something's exiling every creature on the board, and there's a lot of board wipes that do that just hard exile everything. I can just sacrifice my board and have a little bit of recursion in here, and being able to keep it in the graveyard and also keep Yeheni big. It does a lot. So Bloodline Keeper. This is what makes it 2/2. Now I remember. So as flying, you can tap it, put a 2/2 black vampire creature with flying on the battlefield, and you can transform it, activate only if you control 5 or more vampires, which is very easy. One of, I believe, the original flip cards. I've had this card for a long time. And then it becomes the Lord of Lineage. It's a creature vampire. Other vampires you control get +2/+2, and then you can create a 2/2 black vampire token with flying on the battlefield, which is a all-star in this deck. And we have Alenda, the Dusk Rose. She has lifelink, and whenever another creature dies, she gets a 1/1 counter. And when Alenda dies, you create X 1/1 vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is Alenda's power. So this is kind of my board wipe protection. Because if Alenda gets big and I have a lot of sacrifice outlets, I could just sit there and let Alenda get 17 or something like that counters on her. She has lifelink, so she's helping my lifelink sub theme in here. And she also helps me recover from board wipes, because if there's a board wipe and she was big and then I have all these life linkers, and then it's okay, cool, you guys need another board wipe. We have Kalatas, Trader of Get. It's lifelink. If a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead, put a 2/2 black zombie token onto the battlefield, and you can sacrifice it and put counters on it. It's mostly just a way to hate other sacrifice strategies out. It has lifelink, which helps with the lifelink sub-theme, and Kalatas can grow as well. And we have Olivia Valdarin, so one of my favorite cards, because it's so complicated. It's not super complicated, but it's slow, because it's 4-drop with just flying 3/3. But you can pay 1 and a red to deal 1 damage to another target creature, and that creature becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. So you can put a 1/1 counter on Olivia Valdarin, and then for 5 mana you gain control of target vampire. So you can just ping someone's thing for 1 damage because you're biting it, right? Then it becomes a vampire, and then she can control it because they can't resist the allure of Olivia. And absolutely love this card. This is just a fun card for me. I just like being able to just ping things, steal things, get them on my board. And there's also a couple of there's only 2, I believe, non-vampire creatures in this board, but you can also, I've done that before, where I'll ping my own non-vampire creature in here and make them a vampire. Then they start getting all the anthems and the buffs and the benefits and all that other stuff. So we have Sanctum Seeker. Whenever a vampire you control attacks, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this helps the turning sideways theme. This ties in with the life gain theme. Doing vampire stuff. So we have Edgar, Charmed Groom but we have the Dracula version of it, Dracula the Voyager. Other vampires you control get +1/+1, and when Edgar Charmed Groom dies, return to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control, and it becomes the Casket of Native Earth, which is a legendary artifact, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 1/1 white and black vampire creature token with lifelink and put a bloodline counter on it. Then when there's 3 or more, you get to transform it. So this card, anyone who plays Standard knows that Edgar Charmed Groom is super hard to kill. And then when it flips, it gives you value, so you have to go out of your way to either blow it up as a casket, which I love the flavor of killing Dracula in the casket. That's actually a super big flavor win. or you have to hard exile this thing. So we have Vampire of the Dire Moon, just a very good 1-drop. Death Touch, Lifelink, makes people hesitate, can do this on turn 1. Midnight Arsonist, so this card whiffs a lot for me, but I refuse to get rid of it for reasons that I can't comprehend. But when it enters the battlefield, destroy up to X target artifacts without mana abilities, where X is the number of vampires you control. So this is like a big mass board wipe. But not really, because you can't hit treasure tokens, you can't hit mana rocks, you can only hit like artifact or non-mana ability artifacts. So it can hit like weapons and things like that. So I found myself whiffing on this card a lot more than often, where I'm just like, man, I really wish I could blow up that, blow up that Gilded Lotus or something like that, or that I can't blow up that Great Henge or anything like that. So nowhere as powerful as it looks or it sounds. But if someone's playing equipment, then they're in for a bad time. And Olivia, Crimson Bride, she has flying, she has haste, and when she attacks, you return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking, and it gains when you don't control a legendary vampire, exile this creature. Not a ton of legendary vampires in this deck, like I have a couple, but it's just a cool way to get things out of the graveyard, and getting things like Malakir Broodwitch out of the out of the graveyard, and being able to repeat that enters the battlefield trigger, so that's pretty cool. Gifted Aetherborn, just a very good 2-drop. Death Touch, Lifelink, 2/3, good body. Anawan the Ruin Sage. This is a card that's on the maybe pile, which I should probably take up, because it almost does nothing. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player sacrifices a non-vampire creature. This bit me in the butt one time because it made me sacrifice my own Elish Norn, Grand Cenobite, a card I just like. She is not a vampire, but she's a big anthem. And my favorite card in this deck is Chainer, Nightmare Adapt. You can discard a card, and when you may cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn, activate only once a turn, and when a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until your next turn. I like this card because it's the Belmont in my Dracula's Castle. So this is supposed to represent Simon or Richter or Trevor or whoever your Belmont be. It's probably Rakdos, so it's probably a mind-controlled Richter is how it is in my head. But that's my Edgar Markov deck. It's really strong. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it's not. I try to not make it like super optimized, but there's a lot of stinky stuff in there. There's combos in there, which I disclose. And my elevator pitch usually goes like, hey, there's a lot of vampires in here, and these are my combos that I go through, and I show Veto, I show Exquisite Blood, Aether Flux, and just like, are you guys cool with that or not? So as always, thanks for watching, thanks for joining me for this journey, and you guys all have a good day. Thanks for supporting me.